Okay, recording, and we should be up. Part one or part two, I don't know of what. So we are here. We finished off last week. I talked about discourse analysis, content analysis. I talked about the psychiatric system, how that fits. So we land now back to Goffman. I'm going to bring you back to these theories. Remember the piece that I went over about the, what did I do? Learning models, theories, compared to Goffman, which is, and those three main theories, ethnography, phenomenology, symbolic interactionism. Those three theories are societal reaction. Sound familiar? I'm going to go to communication now. So communication has got this piece of, this is where you get what societal reaction is about. It really is kind of communication theory. What becomes the issue is whether it's intended or not. How's it intended to be received? Do I intentionally try and send a message? Is it sort of planned? Is it a strategy? Or is it just, it's unintentional, but you can read it on your side. So think about this in terms of friends, relationships you have with people, your friends, your family, participant observations. You'd have more insight into what's going on in the communication. So think about it that way. So when you start to see it as communication, what's going on between people, social group, you got a better sense of what the impression is. You're looking at the front stage, trying to figure out the backstage. What's going on in there that is in behind the communication? Why do I say, think about simple things. Oh, it's nice to see you. Think about language like, how are you? How many of you say that to people? Right? You show up, see somebody, how are you? It's a normal place. How many of you are actually ready to listen to the answer? If they stop and say to you, actually, it's a shit day. And they want to keep you, so do you have 15 minutes to stand and listen to somebody at the top of the stairs when you're rushing the class? Do you have time to listen? Or is it just, so the message in the how are you is, it's intended to be polite, it's nice. So I don't know if it goes any further than it actually goes to a point of I care about you. The I care about you in the very same words though is when you, is in the intonation of it. So, hi, how are you? It's a passing comment versus, oh, things aren't looking so good, how are you? Or that little extra piece added to the words. Or in the, how are you? And the person sort of pauses before the answer and you stay. So then you maybe make a second inquiry. Is everything all right? Something different? It changes the communication. Although the words are, how are you? In the intended piece, it might just be meant to be polite. And when that person says, I need some help, you're not ready for it. So for me, communication is very much what I say. For me to say to somebody, how are you? I know that those words mean something. And it might mean that I'm going to get trapped somewhere talking for a few minutes. If I don't have time, then I need to be able to say, this is not the right time, but can we come back in an hour or after class? There's room for follow-up. It doesn't mean I can't bother. It means right now is not the right time. So consider that in the intentional versus unintentional messaging. So how are you typically is unintentional. At times could be intentional. Received, conscious, unconscious becomes a big part of it. If you're receiving it, you're paying attention to what I say, how I say it, and you're thinking about my backstage work that goes with my statement, you actually can manipulate that. If the actor believes that it's true, if I think that saying how are you is nice and it's a nice way to greet people and it means that you matter to me, if that's what I believe it means, then that's what it means. And that will appear as a sincere statement, although most of us probably won't engage it to open it up to a longer conversation. But I believe that's what it means, so therefore, my performance is valid. And so this material this week is really getting to you to look at, really gets at any method you decide to use, doing research, This is the big piece behind it. It says, what am I doing here when I do it? Why am I doing this? Why do I talk to these people? Not because of what they're going to provide me. Why does it matter? Why do they matter? It really gets to the why of it, as opposed to just, here's how. So far, we've been doing the how. So if you get the idea, it tells you something about me, the idea that as the observer, you can figure things out. You get a sense of whether I am. If my messaging is unintentional and unconscious, and you get it the same way, that's stuff where we just get along. That's close friends. You just know each other, you're comfortable. That typically is the way communication goes. We've got shared definition. That could be ethnography would show us that if we watched a group of people. If we go in thinking phenomenology, so I use religion as an example or education as an example. If we go in phenomenology looking at things, we all are in the same institution or in this building together, celebrating or engaged in ritual the same way. It means the same thing to all of us. They're in unintentional shared model. The words mean the same thing. It could be different religions. Think about weddings. If any of you have been to a wedding or something where you've got people that it's maybe a wedding from a different religion or different culture group than your own, but everybody's there in celebration of that marriage, that joining together of two people, ideally two families, and in many, if it's religious in the context of God, if you've got all of those things together, everybody there understands that. If you go to a religious wedding, believe or don't believe, you get that's what's about. So that's the idea that you've got shared, got an understanding. Shared definition. It doesn't mean I believe the same thing, but I understand the activity the same way. So symbolic interactionists would say symbolic meanings. Now, as more on that communication, this is a grounded approach too. Sorry, this thing's in the way here. This would be a grounded approach to looking at communication. Unconsciously received, you interpret it the way in the context that your world looks, fits, and looks. Strategy, you can manipulate as a receiver just as much as a sender. If you think about communication and you watch people, you start to realize the way I appear to respond to your questions or answers gives you a sense of something, but you're the one delivering a message. So we get this in the classroom. The looking back, so me, I look around the room. I'm trying to stand still. This is killing me standing still. But it's so that I'm somewhere on the screen, right? But if you get that notion of back and forth, when I look around the room and I make eye contact with you, that feeds me in saying, my message is okay. You're sort of with me. You may not be completely with me. You may have different ideas. You may think I'm crazy or I'm wrong, but it says that we're in the room together. The hard part of the Zoom thing is when everybody's screen is blacked out. What do I do with that? There's no sense of, right? I have no idea if you're there. Click on it, you left the room, right? Turn off your mic, turn off your video. So it makes it harder. The communication is all delivery. So societal reaction needs that return piece, needs something that's some sort of sense of feedback. So strategic interaction is actually a book that Goffman wrote. Goffman, so here's an interesting piece. There's a half a dozen sociologists in the 60s, 70s, I guess, that the CIA then came to them and said, we're engaged in this spy work. How does communication work? So it was interesting because academia, sociology certainly is sort of seen as left-wing, and you've got right-wing conservative governments saying we do spy work against, then predominantly it was Russia or Eastern Bloc countries. So they're saying, we want to know how to do this better. And they came to the left-wing, sort of academics would be the way to see it as. They've come to them for advice on how it works. So Goffman did this one. It's an interesting book because it's the idea that of sending a message, being aware that you're paying attention to what I'm doing. And trying to send you a message, but it doesn't look like I'm sending you a message. It's not the same as theater or classwork where I'm looking and I look to see if you're looking. I assume you're not, so I assume you're looking, but I do some subtle thing that you pick up on and maybe I don't. It's as if I don't, but in fact, I'm testing to see if you are. So it is the walking down the street, right? It's somebody walking down the street. I think you're watching. So I'm on one side of the spy team, right? This is spy versus spy as I'm walking down the street. And I meet somebody, looks like we exchange a note. I walk away. I look like I'm trying to put it in my pocket. And I walk away. I drop it on the ground. So then I watch to see who comes to pick it up. Now, or somebody else watches. But the idea here is I've made it look like I have met somebody in secret. I put my note away. I walked away. So it's I don't want you to be aware that I know you're my audience. And I'm setting you up to come and pick it up so I can figure out who is my audience. It's that spy stuff, right? It's James Bond or whatever. But in it, what's interesting is they dissected all of that stuff and put it into a strategy move and put it into communication. They've got it to this place of looking at who's sending the message, who's receiving, who's expected to receive it, who actually does, what is the feedback they send, and what is the sender's response to it. So now we're in theater. If you go back to the front stage, backstage, you're back in a theater environment where you've got somebody, the actors, presenting to an audience. The audience cheers, the actors come back. The audience cheers more, they come back again. So you've got somebody like Bruce Springsteen. You know who Bruce Springsteen is? Is that way too old? So Springsteen does like 3-hour concerts apparently. A concert, so understand this is business. Music is a business. They get paid for 1 hour for Union in Ontario. They get paid for 2 hours worth of music, 40-minute sets, 3 of them. 40 minutes, 20-minute break, 40 minutes, 20-minute break. And then a 40-minute set. That's what they're paid to do. So what you'll get is they'll sometimes do an hour set, and most concerts I think you go to, you get a warm-up band, there's a little break, and the main band comes on for about an hour. They do a set, they do some encores. You might get an hour and a half out of them. That's built into the contracts because they're paying people to set them up down the roadies. They know how much they're paying to say this is what we're putting on this concert because we're going to make money. They aren't doing it for entertainment for themselves. It's business. So in that, they need to know that we pay the roadies for 3 hours of labor, and then there's a 4-hour breakdown session. They are here for 3 hours. The concert's 3, and at the end of the 3-hour window, it's your job to start taking apart the stage. So you get some guy like Springsteen who comes along and says, no, keep going. I'll just pay them more. I'll pay them overtime. And he keeps playing and playing 3-hour shows. So what you've got is, as long as the audience is saying, yeah, more, he keeps playing more. And it costs him money to play more, a lot to play longer. But he does. It's that recognition of the back and forth. There's a presentation to the audience responds, the actor responds to the audience response, and then if the audience responds well again, the actor keeps going. If the audience sort of quiets out, starts to turn away, the actor lets it go. It's not one back and forth. It's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's what I think you think of me, and I respond to the way I think you think of me. It's the thinking back and forth. If you get that idea, next time you're engaged in a conversation with somebody that's a big deal, think about that. Watch how that goes. That's kind of what you move to in participant observation. It's that dissecting a little bit, or at least considering how it's back and forth. That's what social research is about. We're really after the interaction piece. What is going on here? And then the why. Who's got the message? Who's sending it? Who's receiving? Why and how? So it becomes very much the minor details that show up. They tell us what's really going on. Number here, 15. So, good performance, you accept it. It doesn't matter whether it's real. Good performance, whether I make it up or whether it really is truly sincere, it doesn't matter. If it's well done, you buy into it. This goes back to people that are good at manipulating others. They can convince people to do stuff because they put on a good performance. There's some who actually get people to do things and they mean well, but they just don't follow through. It's not a performance. It's sincere. They just are weak on the follow through. So that would still be a good performance. It's not about a good performance is all staged. It's about the way, if it's sincere, I'm delivering whatever I'm saying or doing or thinking, and you buy into it. That's good performance. Doesn't mean that I'm necessarily mixing it up. Contrived is where I'm starting to, at this point, is I'm doing it on purpose. This is the intention. Prudence. I worked out with you, I pretend to be your friend. Back to a few weeks ago, I talked about somebody who wants a ride home. They pretend to be your friend. It seems like they're friends, and you're driving me, picking me up every day on the way to school, and then as soon as, uh-oh, touch the button. Uh-oh. Yes, no, what did I do? Hang on. Oh. What did I touch? HDMI, what's that about? Just a sec. Maybe, yes, no. Yeah. We gotta re-plug in and it'll work. Oh, it's going into battery saving mode. Woo, good. We're back. Battery saving mode. No, it's not good. No, it's not. So if we get into this Prudence place, I'm thinking about tomorrow. I want to ride to school, so I'm going to be nice to you. You're my friend for a while. When your car's not working, I'm not so much your friend. Well, that communication was prudential. It was about going forward. It's about tomorrow you'll be my ride still. That's kind of the simplest form of it. But in doing that, if I am manipulating you to get something, then ultimately you're uninformed. You don't know what's going on. You might figure it out later, maybe not. But that's a contrived performance. It's made up, it's planned, and it's planned to gain something. In social research, that's a problem. That's the deception piece. In social research, no different than the false friend. Future interactions are all about being able to predict what tomorrow is. People you trust them because you might trust them because they've been around for a long time. You might trust them because something shared trauma certainly sometimes comes into this. You've got this idea of tomorrow. We call people you call your best friend. Why I trust you? Why? I trust my brother. Why? We've been around for a long time together. I just do. If I was to drop and I was able to get a message to him, I know somebody would show up to help. If I was just, I need help, somebody would get here. That's an element of trust that goes with it. It's because of long term for me. For others, could just be a feeling. So hope, if you're a new friend in my life and I'm in trouble and I call you, I'm gonna hope that you're going to respond. We often confuse hope, I don't confuse, but if you break it down, what you consider trusting people, and when you hear people use language of trust, or in social research, they talk about groups that are aligned together. Often it's hope that we can rely on each other. It's hope that we've got a future interaction. As opposed to, we actually know for sure it will, and trust implies we know versus hoping. So something to consider in that when you think about the communication. So you're trying to dissect that background stuff, the background material. Mocking is interesting because that's when you see people being teased. New into a group, we tease each other. That's sort of gives a sense of are you included? Yeah, you can take it. We accept you. Mocking is interesting when you see people leaving a group. So this gets to backstage and group dynamics. Again, if you end up doing research later, assisting on a research project, or if you're reading research where they look at group activity. When someone is being mocked on the way out, so think about this, we've got a group of us here who are, I was going to turn this thing around and capture all of us, but there's a group of us here of, there's something else, including me. Where's the rest of you? So in it, we've got a group we meet every Monday night at 6 o'clock and we decide what we're going to do. So back to that. If today though, if what happens is 2 people decide not to show up anymore, so now it's a group of 5, and those 2 never come anymore, what does that tell us about how close our group is? What's our connection? Does it challenge how tight our group is? Because if people left, it says that maybe the group's not quite what we thought it was. Maybe it's not quite that good. Their leaving implies that. So arguably, a part of keeping our group intact is to identify them as other, as different, as less than, mocking them, making comments about them. Negative comments are an indication of backstage. That helps the group to align together. It's by analyzing the backstage you can make sense. It's like, oh, okay, that's the stuff you can make sense of. Old people are funny to listen to because when you hear them talk about who they used to be connected with and who they aren't, and what they have to say about the people they're no longer connected with, it's not often that, or it's not uncommon for it to be negative. It's about reassuring myself or reassuring us in the group that we're still okay. We're still in a good place. Normal. If you dissect it, you can make sense of that. If not, we don't notice it. It's just going on. And that's what, wouldn't matter which particular method you use to get to it, or which, whether phenomenology, ethnography, symbolic interactionism, any of them would work, that you could work through that and say, oh, here's what's going on. So mocking's a big deal. If you end up doing research and there's some element of groups involved in it, then you start to look for that. That's a good indicator of the group alignments. Organization, remember I talked about organization? So rounded approach, the cynics, the ones who are still in the group, but they're the ones who are making disparaging comments. They've got things to say about the organization that aren't very nice. If I was constantly saying bad things about Guelph Humber, I'm thinking right now we're trying to get things back up to speed. Right? They're going to do little social things. What are they on? Got coffee and treats or something going on during the day. Like there's elements, there's little things they're trying to do to pull our community back together because we got broken up. And people went different ways over the strike. So trying to bring that alignment back. Those who are critical of it, the cynics, give us some insight. They'll tell us the cracks in the organization. They'll tell us the flaws in the performance. That's the value of the cynic. So it's not always bad. They're worth listening to. You've got to weigh in the source, but when you've got someone lower status, they're more likely to be cynical, which could go either way. The lower status, you want to find out what's going on in place, ask the cleaners. If you want to, but on the other side, if you listen to, you hear the cynical stuff, then you look and say, where do they stand in the organization? Probably lower status. So either could direct you, either from their activity to their status or from their status to their activity. The bosses don't break out of this. The bosses organize the presentation front. So think about work, talked about that. Think about family, your parents organize the presentation. Sincere, it's not that they're making it up, it's not contrived, it's sincere. But the kids are the ones that break out of the mold. And those kids are the ones that essentially are showing us the cynicism, and what they're showing us is their status. So that's something else that comes out of, and it wouldn't matter which of the 3 theories you use to get there. So the grounded approach, what it gets us to look at is we start to see, why does this group need to organize? Why is there a presentation front? And that's where you start to bring your theory and to apply it to observation. When you see research, research should be descriptive. We saw these behaviors. These are the things. And then at some point, we wrap in and say, here's our analysis of it, and what's it about? What's the organizing? Why are they organizing? What is it that they're predicting for tomorrow? What is the idea of future to this group? That's what you're after. Front stage, backstage. The backstage, if you get access to it, that's what it shows you. You're able to then start to inquire into this and potentially, hopefully, figure out just what's going on. And it's then goes to how do you go about finding out? Do you ask? Do you do interviews? Do you do observation? Participant observation. Grounded approach again. If you understand the backstage, you can predict. If you're part of the group, in-group, out-group, if you're part of that inside group, part of the organization, you can predict what tomorrow is. Knowing what time class is, we organize around 6 o'clock for this course. For this section of this course, we are organized at 6 o'clock. We can predict that we'll be here at 6 o'clock. Asking questions to reassure that we are, right? The little survey thing I did is ultimately this stuff. You could dissect that and say, that was this. That was predicting for next week. Do we, don't we? Do we bother showing up, right? Imagine you got here, the few of you that said you want to come. If I didn't do that survey, and I just said, well, we've been running online, so we'll just stay online. I don't say anything. I assume that we just stay online because we've been doing that now for 4 weeks. And just set up to go online. So you show up in the room, and what are you thinking? Right? Well, they said everything's back to class. Wouldn't there be an expectation we should be back to class? That ability to predict that yes is because we accept the organizational rule or the presentation that they've said back to class, which means back to class. How do I interpret class? Class to me is talking about the material and hopefully you engaging me back, like talking a bit. But that talking piece that's what class means to me. It doesn't matter to me whether it's online or here. Well, it does actually, because I prefer face-to-face. But if we've interpreted that word back to class differently, that's a social organization thing. That's the prediction. So accurately predicting very much comes to definitions. So it might be from personal. You know the person, so you know what they mean. There might have been something said by them. It might be reference people. It could be somebody else. You ask somebody else, hey, what are you doing? Are we back? Aren't we? We do that all the time. In family stuff, it might be reference. So think about how many times have you thought about fair or not fair in your personal life or anywhere? How many times does fair come because you see what happens with somebody else and what happens to you? And you can see it as fair or unfair. It's because it's in reference point to the other. So that interactive history is what we're after. Social research, that's what you're trying to dig out. The backstage, somebody could tell you they're showing you the backstage and not actually be showing you the backstage. If you go to, when I talked about the observation one, the nursing, remember I talked about my friend that did research in obstetrics and what went on in operating rooms with childbirths. So you could go speak to nurses, interview them, and they could give us, oh, we know this is what goes on in the room. They could give me a real thing, and I could come away and think, wow, that's great. Reference points. These are nurses with real experience, and they told me what's going on, and come away thinking I've got the backstage, and what I've got is, I don't actually have history. I've got an interview, and the interview gave me their thoughts, and potentially all front stage. But they gave it to me in such a way that I think I saw the back. They give me a little bit of the weaknesses in the operating room, but they don't give me the real stuff. They don't tell me how many times they've had to stop a surgeon from sewing somebody up because there's still a sponge in that person's body. Where the nurse would say, whoa, there's one more. They won't do that. So they haven't really given me the backstage, although I might come away feeling that they have. So history makes a big difference in social research. When you're looking at people providing you information, articles you read, what's their exposure? Was it a one-off? The healing tradition stuff I gave you, those articles to read, they're not being tested, right? The test is all the PowerPoints. Mostly the second half, to be a few from that first half, not too many. There might be a couple of questions per week. But the healing traditions articles, you've got somebody writing up what's going on, mental health issues in Indigenous communities. The writers are Indigenous peoples. Does that give us some sense that there's a history they maybe got a little more insight than us? What if they're from different nations? You've got someone from Oneida studying Cree, and you've got Oneida, or you've got somebody doing research that comes from the remote areas of BC, and they're doing research on Cree, swampy Cree here in Ontario. They might have not a whole lot more history or access than we do. They may well be getting a bit of a presentation from too. But from outside, we would assume that because they're Indigenous, they have exposure. You gotta be careful of that. So in this one, sparse interaction, you can't tell what's going on. This bit here where I put it together in terms of your own life and the way you connect with people, this is exactly what research is. It's just done in a bigger way. It's looking at society as opposed to your own lifestyle. So I'm trying to put it in terms of life experience. But this is what you read in research. People tell you what's going on in social groups like they've got it all figured out. You got to be careful with it. When you read with that critical eye. Read it, skim through what somebody says. Think about their argument. Skim through it, get a feel for what they're saying, and then go back and read it again. And now you read it with a critical eye and say, "Ooh, wait a minute. What about this? What about that?" Anything that's based in research, you should be doing that. Because the amount of times research has been done, we have hung our hat on it as knowing it's got the answer, and then find out later that it's wrong. Freud, beautiful example. That content analysis of Freud I did last week. When you look at some of his stuff, dead wrong. The guy's wrong on some stuff. Research-based, yep. So personal stuff, sparse interaction, you can't really tell. Is somebody being honest with you? Aren't they being honest? You think they are, maybe yes, maybe no. There's some room. It feels like it's honest, but personal, if you got no personal interaction at all, and this is the difference between participant observation and observation. So your coffee shop is in the straight observation from a distance, you've got no personal interaction. How much guesswork would you have to do in that observation to figure out who's doing what? How much assumption work was involved in that? How wrong might you have been? So something to consider and to be careful. So symbolic interactionism works. Sort of gives us a sense of structure. We start to look at the system. We recognize there is a system and we're trying to figure out the moving parts. Remember I said phenomenology is the looking down, right? It is the globe. It's that glass ball over top of the globe. It's that piece that was over top. That overarching piece in phenomenology. Where symbolic interactionism says, no, there is a system. Let's figure out how it works. What's the interaction piece? What's the connections? How does this thing move and work? You ever looked at an old watch, an old clock with all the little wheels and gears and stuff in it? It's that. So generalized other and significant other. Significant other we're used to, right? Someone who's close to you, family, friend, relationship, some connection. Generalized other, though, this is where you start to move big gaps, big spaces, and you're starting to think about sparse interaction. This goes back to week 1, and I talked about where you sit, who we sit with, who we don't sit with, why we don't sit with somebody, why on a bus we would choose away from someone. Bias that comes into it, bias, judgment, prejudice, prejudgment, prejudice. Break down the words. Prejudice is prejudgment based on what I see of you and what I don't know, because you are this not significant, you're a generalized other. Now I have this sense of what that other means, and therefore all people, all pick a term, right? All Hispanic people are, all Torontonians, all Canadians are, all Americans. We might take out the word all. But when we use the word Americans, what does it mean versus Canadians? Is it exposure? Is it a generalized other? Negative, positive? So when you see language like that in research, you've got to be careful to try and analyze it a bit, where they're coming from. At the methodology, this. So symbolic interactionism looks at the system. Ethnomethodology, so remember phenomenology is the glass over top of everything. What's the shared belief piece? Symbolic interactionism, it's a system. What are all the moving pieces? Ethnomethodology, we're inside, we're looking, and we're looking at individuals and people. What do they do? Period. What do they do? What are their interests? So why does this person do something? Why does this person do something? Why does this person do something? This goes back to why you came to Guelph Humber rather than a university. Many of us have different reasons for being here. Underneath it, we can find out there's a big theory of education, but some are here because it's close to home, some it's because of scholarship, because of designated program. So in it, it's about identifying all those little individual parts. And sometimes it's just, this might get to just describing all those individual parts, and it can end there. With ethnomethodology, if you do participant observations or interviewing, you might just describe what you see and not actually analyze it. You may not break it down into this makes sense about it. No, there's all these people doing these things. You might come away and say this one seems to be more dominant than the others, but this allows you to just describe. So that's a key piece in it. And that's finished off those slides. So, do you need a break? We should keep going. Keep going? I'm probably about another half an hour. Keep going. Get me out. You can't see what I can see over here, but you should see the dirt. I'm getting some cut eye over here. Get it. Keep going. Stop talking. Get out. All right. So let's put some of this stuff back together. Key terms. This would be kind of important for that test. Content analysis. What is within that frame? Remember I'd said.
Would you be able to switch this screen to what you're showing in class?
Oh, look. Yeah, I could. That would be a good idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're still on the old PowerPoint?
Yeah, we're still on the grounded approach.
Okay, thank you. That one, bring this one, need this one. So length, okay. Where's my little button here? This one. Okay, you see that? Content analysis. So we're down to the language, back to sort of like communication. It's what goes on back and forth between people. What's the connect? Content analysis dissects that. So that is the frame of reference stuff, right? For Goffman, I use frame analysis, but it is the picture frame. Right? What's going on within the picture? What occurs here? Do I have some kind of little house thing going on? Do I have clouds? I'm not going to draw a picture because this is really bad. But I'm going to stop there. You get this, right? Picture frame thing? We're good? Do you remember the Dr. Seuss house we looked at? So that idea of looking at a, what's the frame of reference, somebody looking at it. So you see the frame, content analysis is just looking at the frame and dissecting the picture. I see this house and it looks like this. And when I look at this house, it's a real one it's seven levels, the same as the Dr. Seuss animated house. It's got stairs on level 3 to 4. So you look for it, find the similars. That's content. That's an analysis of the picture, what's in the content. It tends to be words, is what we focus on more often, but it could be the other. So in that is what I did last week, right? How often are the words used? When I use the Freud one, how often do you see the word ego in his writings versus it versus superego, or whichever the terms. The discourse analysis we did last week. Discourse analysis breaks us out of what's going on in the picture to looking at the frame? What put it in the picture? Why is it there in the first place? So content analysis dissects what's in it. Discourse analysis speaks to why is it there and how is that discussion going on? Why does it go on the way it goes on? That's what it gets to. So in these, what you start to get is terminology starts to show up. So ethnography of communication, another name for theory. Don't worry about knowing it. But the idea is here, somebody has come up with this terminology. Somebody was doing research. Somebody, in doing their PhD, came up with a new title. They did ethnography. They broke down communication. And when we broke it down into bits, we said, wow, this is what's going on. It makes sense of activity between people, not just words. The recognition that it includes others. So it's the idea of there's a general assertion, there's patterns that start to come out of the way communication occurs. Period. That's why we have communication theory. Have all of you done a counseling course or whatever? You've got that linear piece where there's you talk and then there's the listen and then there's a listener and then they send a message back. And so there's the linear one, then there's others that have got a little more holistic method to them. That has come out of somebody doing research that breaks it down into bits. But if you start to see them, then you get another one, ethnoscience, structural ethnography. There are all kinds of theories out there on research, how to look at material. I think they pare down to those main three. If you grasp phenomenology, symbolic interactionism, and ethnography, they will make sense of anything you read where people have done research. Empirical research, there's the big word, empirical. If you're seeing that, it's that I looked at a whole group of things and I've dissected. They probably really pare down to these. These are new terms that somebody came up when they're doing a PhD. Ethnoscience. The chapter does a book on the breaking down the qualitative and quantitative divide. Used to be you were either quantitative or qualitative. Now they put them together and say a little bit of both words. So it's that idea of ethnoscience. We can take ethnographic research. We can take interviews and turn it into a quantitative analysis. We can do quantitative analysis and observations. We can code participant observations and therein do statistical analysis of them. So ethnoscience. You don't need to know that term. It's that when you see those labels and theories that go to with method, see how they fit in other ones. The big three, so symbolic interactionism, studying what they're doing. We might come up with a phenomenon, might not, dissecting the system. Ethnomethodology, just people involved, right? Remember the little screen thing there? Hermeneutic circle, this is a big deal. Write this one down. You might want to save this for next week. That's cool. So hermeneutic circle. You can't know the one piece without knowing the rest. If you read the chapter on interviewing, it's a good chapter on interviewing. It's a good chapter on interviewing because it's in a book on social research. If you handed that to the interview, remember the interview we watched of the police officer interrogating the serial killer, serial offender? That interviewing chapter, because it's in a research methods book, is meaningful in research. Probably not so meaningful to that interviewer, maybe a little bit, not a lot. In the context of a research methods book, it's great. In the context of doing interrogations of a serial offender, not so much. Likewise, you can't look at the book without looking at the parts. If that book says research methods and social sciences, great. If the whole book is on interviewing and surveys and it leaves out anything to do with observations, it's weak. So you need all of those little chapters to make it a meaningful book. But likewise, to put meaning to the chapter, it's the title of the book that they're in that makes it meaningful. To understand me in my life, or you in your life, is to understand something of family background. So that one where I use my own family, talking about participant observation, and it puts some perspective on me and my behavior. You can't look at my family without understanding how many people are in it, birth order. I think birth order is interesting. Adler is a old theory on it. And it looks at oldest sibling, youngest sibling, years apart in between them. It's very interesting. But you can't look at my family without identifying that the family means there's a parent and 4 children. You need to see that there's moving parts. Likewise, to look at the parts, if you look at them in context of the family, it makes a little more sense. So it's not quite like content analysis versus just frame analysis, but you've got looking at the individuals to make sense of the big one, looking at the big stuff to make sense of the little one. It is constantly looking in and out, inside, outside of things. That's what the hermeneutic circle is. Learning model, back and forth. The idea of even the dramaturgical approach, the communication back and forth, very much gets at this. So if you get to the hermeneutic circle, the book talks about it a little bit. Anybody remember reading the term in the book somewhere? Yes? No? Don't worry about it. But the idea is it's a way that we learn. You see the parts, directs you to the big issue, from the big issue back down to the little parts. You're going back and forth. Much like I said to skim read a chapter and then go back and read it more closely. Case studies, we're going to talk about really quick, because essentially a case study is, I see in many ways, a content analysis of people's behavior. Not so much words. Diary of Anne Frank, case study. I think I talked about it on week 3 maybe. But the Diary of Anne Frank is, right, it's the story of a young girl, oppressive regime, fear of what's going to happen if she's discovered, hiding, being hidden by the neighbors. That gives us, that's a case study. It wasn't written as a case study, but it essentially is. It's a one person that when you read that material, it really represents the whole. A young girl, a young teen, growing up in that kind of fear of a repressive regime. Absolute fear of what's going to happen if they find me. Relying on the trust of neighbors, hoping that those neighbors will protect them. Hoping they don't just get discovered for some other reason than the neighbors disclose. All of that is not, we can strip it out of Germany in World War II and a young Jewish girl, and we can make it a girl in Syria today. We can make it a girl in any number of countries today where it's just not a very safe environment. They living in fear in somewhere is that regime that's going to come through and make things bad. So it gives us, although it's an old case, still gives us a typical case. It will make sense of it for us to say, wow, that's how it would have been. Case studies are used in business a lot. When you see the term typically, what it is it dissects. In an organization, you would dissect a role. What does this person do? If you're your coffee shop one. What is the cashier? You identify the roles and you say cashier role. Here's what a cashier does. Then you dissect it, you describe it all and say, and then at some point you would probably shift to interviewing a cashier. And you get them to tell you what it feels like doing it. What goes on, how does it play for that individual? The individual is going to give you a sense of what typical is to be a cashier. Ideally, you would flow chart it though. You'd sort of look at what decisions do they make, what decisions don't they make, who makes decisions, who do they report to. So you look at it structurally and then you bring an individual to it. That's a case study. They're valuable, they're in research methods, it's probably one of the simpler ones to deal with. And now this last little bit, these last couple of slides. This is the stuff, if you can get this, will make all research, if you ever do any or you read, way easier to make sense of. If you don't get it, then this is just me being wonky, because this is subject-object relations are very difficult. But what I found is once I started to see things in these terms, the thought of research, whether it's doing it or reading it, just became really simple. Very straightforward. The gaze. The gaze is an empowered place. It's the looking on somebody. How many of you, and think about even in the classroom, I look around the room when I'm talking. I do it all the time. I look for eye contact. How many of you, I've had somebody at the front of the room look, and when they look at you, you look for a minute, but then you look away. At what point do you avert your gaze? Do any of you really lock eyes? Some do, but lock eyes with a professor when they're teaching. What do you do for a bit, and then you shift? It gets uncomfortable sometimes, and we did that whole notion of being observed. It can get uncomfortable. Being observed, being in the gaze. We're not, when you do presentations at the front of the room, typically it's uncomfortable. It's because you know people are observing you. There's room for mistake. There's room for things to just not go, even though you haven't planned it. It's just that things don't go comfortably. So the gaze is empowered, being on the receiving end. This is the I place. Back to week 1, remember I talked about subject? Subject, object. Subject is the I place. So when you're the one watching and you're doing research and watching, you are an empowered I. When you're the observed, you're now the object. You're the thing that's being looked at. It's an interesting place. In school, I think classrooms are interesting. So as the person at the front of the room talking, I position, subject or object? Subject? Think about it. You can come back to it. It's awkward. This is why I think this stuff is so valuable to get. The subject is an empowered place. I'm empowered because of the position I have, to some degree. Well, I'm the knower. Does the knowledge give me a social place of power? Or a claim to it? Maybe not actually have it, but does it give me a position to be able to claim some kind of social power because I have some status and that I know this stuff and I'm teaching it to you? It's empowered relative. If there's no audience, though, if nobody shows up, am I empowered? So could I still do the lecture to an empty room, to a video screen? Sure. So the I still holds. An empowered I is awkward, but without you to look. So, but if you're in the room and I've got a room full of people looking, am I the gazed upon, the observed? Which typically is a disempowered spot. Think about this. Let's see if I can come up with this one.